In this video, we're going to finish up our discussion on scope inside of JavaScript. It's a really important topic, so I've broken this up into two videos. I want to make sure you understand the basics of scope before we continue on, because everything else we learn in the language, things we'll cover later like loops and functions, all of those things, like the if statement, are also going to create new code blocks. So scope is only going to become more and more important as we create more and more real-world applications. So it's best to understand the basics now when things are relatively simple, and then we'll continue to see how these same rules get applied later when our programs get more complex. For the moment though, there are just a couple of edge cases related to what we talked about in the last video that I do want to discuss in this video. So we're going to go ahead and do just that. I'm going to kick things off by creating a brand new file. I'm going to call this one scope2 for scope part 2. That's scope2.js. And we're going to start off with an example similar but not quite equal to what we did in the last one. To kick things off, let's go ahead and create an if statement with a condition of true. And I'm going to take this whole thing and copy it to the clipboard and paste it once inside of itself and then once down below, creating the same scope tree we had in the last video. So we have global, then we have local. In that local, we have another local. And then we have the sibling local down below. So this scope tree, exactly the same as this scope tree because our code blocks match up with these code blocks. Now we already know that I can reference a variable from the global scope in a local scope. Right here, for example, I can say let name equal Andrew. And then down here, I can use console.log name. We can then fill out our scope tree, setting name up in the global namespace. And remember, this is just documentation. This doesn't affect the program in any way whatsoever. And what's going to happen? Well, we're going to get to this line. It's going to look for it in the local scope. It's not going to find it. It's going to go up. It's not going to find it. It's going to go up to the root. It's going to find it. It's going to print the value. We already know that. That's not the interesting part. What I want to talk about is the fact that when we have different scopes, we can define variables with the same name in each scope. So in the variables.js file, one of the first rules was you can't define a variable more than once. And that was true. I tried to define pet name twice, but I wasn't able to do that. If I did want to change the value, I just reassigned it by leaving let off. Well, that's because we were trying to define a variable more than once in the same scope. If it's in a different scope, that's okay. So right here, I could say let name equal Mike. Now we can go ahead and adjust the scope tree, putting name right here. And we can simulate what's going to happen. When we get to this line, it's going to look for name. It's not going to find it in the local scope, so it's going to go up to the parent. It's going to look for it there. It is going to find it, and it's going to use that value. This program is going to print Mike. It's not going to crash. It's not going to print Andrew. Let's prove that by rerunning it. Over here, node scope2.js. When I run it, what do I get? I get Mike showing up. This is known as variable shadowing in JavaScript. It's when a variable in a local scope uses its value instead of a variable in a parent scope. So the local variable's value is shadowing over the parent's, basically hiding it from existence. So if I reference name here, I'm always going to get this value for name. I'm never going to end up getting the value for name in that parent scope. So that's variable shadowing, and it's important to know because if you don't know about that, you might think it's illegal to define two names like this. That's not the case as long as they are in different scopes, which is indeed true. Let's take this little example one step further to really drive this point home. Down below, console.log name again. This time around, this is still going to print Mike. We haven't changed anything up here. What's going to happen with this one though? Well, it's going to look in local right here. For name. Does it exist? No. So what does it do? It doesn't go to this. It doesn't go to this. It only can go up the tree to the parent. Does the parent have name? Yes. What's name's value? It's Andrew. So in this case, we're going to get Mike here and we're going to get Andrew here. If I rerun the script with the up arrow key and enter, that's exactly what we get. We still get Mike unchanged and we get Andrew printing down below. Scope comes into play in a lot of different situations. This is just another one. So that's the first half of this video, talking about variable shadowing. What I want to talk about now is what happens when we assign a value to a variable. Right here, before I log out name, I'm going to change name. So I'm going to set name equal to Jen. So what's going to happen with this program? Well, just like when we read a variable's value, when we write a value, we start by looking for that variable in the local scope. Is there a local name whose value we can reassign? And the answer is no, there is no name right here. So what do? We keep going from parent to parent to parent all the way to the root, looking for the first instance of name. We find it in the very next step. We go up to the parent, we find name, that's this one right here, and we reassign its value. So this line is changing name from Mike to Jen. At no point in time are we assigning a new value to this one up above. It stops as soon as it finds the first instance right here. That means if we save this program and rerun it, I would expect to see the changed name here. It should show Jen. And I would expect to see the unchanged name here, which should show Andrew. If I rerun it, I get Jen, I get Andrew. Everything is working correctly. So it's important to note that when you are assigning variable values, it's just as important to take scope into consideration. All right, there's just one more thing I want to discuss. To visualize what I want to talk about, we are going to comment out this variable declaration and this variable declaration. Then we're going to remove name from here and here. And you'll notice that in this file, I'm actually never declaring any variables. There's not a single usage of let that's not hidden behind comments. So let's go ahead and run the program and see what happens. I'm going to rerun the script. And what do we get? We get Jen for both. So this is probably not the behavior we were expecting, but let's go ahead and analyze why this is what's happening. So we have exactly 0 variables declared. So the tree does look like this. But when we run this line, what it's going to do is it's going to look in the local scope for name. It's not going to find it. It's going to look in the parent scope for it. It's not going to find it. It's going to look in that parent's scope. It's not going to find it. When it gets to the root, if it hasn't found it, it declares it. And this is a big problem. So that means that when we assign a new value to name right here, we're actually creating a new global up above. And that might not be clear because there's no usage of let anywhere in the program. This is referred to as a leaked global, when we assign a value to a variable, but that variable was never explicitly defined. So in this case, we have a new global name. That's why it prints here, and that's why it prints here. How do we avoid leaked globals? Well, we just go ahead and actually declare the variable somewhere. We could declare it in this scope. Maybe we want it in the global scope, or maybe we just want it right here. So let name, for example. Now we have a local variable name, which would show up here. That means we'll still get Jen here, and we won't get Jen down below. This is going to create a program, well, still fails, at least fails for a reason we can wrap our heads around. So always make sure that you use let to create a variable if you're going to be using it throughout your program. If you try to assign values to variables you never defined, you're going to get into a situation where your code doesn't work as expected. If I save the file and rerun it, we get Jen printing once, and then we get our error, name is not defined. And this is probably what we expected the first time around, but without let, we never bound name to any specific scope, so it created it in the global scope. All right, that's it for this video, and that is it for this section. Now, I know the last couple of videos were a bit theoretical. We didn't learn a new syntax for the language. We just learned a bit more about how what we're already doing works, and this is important. It's important to understand what happens behind the scenes. And you are going to get a little hands-on experience with scope in the next section. There's going to be a few challenges where I'm going to give you a program I wrote, and you're going to have to generate the scope tree and figure out what's going to happen. So keep all of these rules in mind, but don't stress about memorizing every little detail. We're going to talk about scope over and over again, and I promise you these will become second nature in no time. Now, what did we learn in this section? Well, when we started, we knew nothing. We learned all about variables, strings, booleans, numbers. We learned about flow control, how to control the flow in our application using if statements, so we can run one block of code and not another block of code. You also learned about those comparison operators and our logical and or operators, allowing us to set up more complex real-world conditional checks. We're going to continue building on our JavaScript knowledge in the next section by talking about functions and objects, two core features to the language, and that's what's going to take us from creating things that feel more like little scripts to things that feel more like actual programs. I'm really excited to get to that, so let's go ahead and jump into the next video, which is the section introduction. I'll see you then.